in the corporate world, this is something that could be a really valuable tool for corporations. So we've had a number of discussions with multinationals who see the importance of thinking about water differently. I will be happy to circle back to Joe in accounting or Ned in the C-suite, but I need somebody to say like, yes, if we need this data as a global public good.
Hello and welcome to The Stream, an unscripted, unedited, free-flowing conversation with guests who reject the status quo in the world of water and beyond. My name is Tom Freyberg. I'm an environmental journalist and content creator specializing in water.
And I'm Will Sarni, a water strategy consultant, doing my part to solve wicked water problems.
And today we are thrilled to be joined by Sera Young, who is an associate professor of anthropology and global health from Northwestern University. Sera, good morning to you. Good afternoon this side. Welcome and welcome to The Stream. How are you? Morning,
gents. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great to see you. I have to say, you're our first anthropologist. We could say we've had investors, entrepreneurs, utility, a lot of water people. So hopefully you won't be put off anthropology after 30 minutes speaking with me and Will.
Well, you always remember your first anthropologist.
There you go. There you go.
Oh, okay. That's the title for this episode. Definitely.
It's written itself already, right? So, from the episodes you may have seen, Sera, we always try and kind of find out the origin story, like what drew people to water or kind of how they came to realize they need to innovate and start up a company or a solution. But I'd love to kind of hear kind of the journey for you. I mean, from previous conversations, it's the last 4 or 5 years you've spent kind of looking into water, but from anthropology to water, is that a kind of inevitability, you think?
Yeah. Well, I would almost say like I didn't come to water, water came to me. Anthropologists are supposed to be like children in the field. They're supposed to ask naive questions and like I have 2 young daughters and they're always saying, because why? And so, because why, mama? And so I was like that. Right? I was like that, because why? So just listening to people and in this instance, it was Western Kenya. I had a large NIH funded study to understand the consequences of food insecurity in what the development world calls the first 1,000 days. So that's the year prior to delivery and then the 2 years after. So you get the woman unpregnant, her pregnancy, and then the dyad 2 years after. And we're really good at measuring food insecurity. There's 8 or 9 questions that are well validated. And so the idea was to measure, here's a technical term, measure the crap out of food insecurity throughout this 1,000 days. And we measured it really regularly. And then you can understand how food insecurity shapes economic well-being, maternal mental health, child growth, all that stuff. So with my nutritionist hat on, because I have my PhD in nutritional anthropology. And then up until that point, it was medical anthropology at the University of Amsterdam, University of Michigan. So I knew how to measure food insecurity. I wanted to make sure we were measuring stuff that moms cared about. And so we did this thing called photo elicitation, which is a fancy term for giving people cameras and asking them to take pictures of the things that matter. This is a great way to do research on almost any topic. But in this case, we gave cameras to the mamas and said, take pictures of things that shape how you feed your kids. And we got back pictures kind of as expected of failed crops, sick chickens, drunken husbands drinking up the food money. Those were expected. We got back a huge number of pictures of water, and water in ways that that are invisible otherwise, or ways that water shapes life that I couldn't have imagined. And these photos made me think like, well, yeah, food's important, but heck, so is water. And we need to be quantifying these experiences in the same way that we can quantify experiences with food.
Sera,
amazing. So go on, Will.
I love this piece of your story because, I spend most of my time, or, a good portion of it, working with corporations and NGOs that have I would argue, an outside-in view of things like, access to safe drinking water. And I'm not really convinced they're always correct. They're looking at things like, replenish, my water footprint, as opposed to what you did. You actually asked people and engaged in a, conversation very broadly about what mattered and what was broken as a way to get to the root causes. And, as being, in the world of water, it's kind of unheard of, to do what you do, that approach, that thinking. And I don't want to say it's bottoms up, but it's a human-centric. No, I'm being sincere. You will send me a Northwestern T-shirt, though, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, but you're going to the people and asking them and getting their input on what doesn't work as a way to get to the root causes to fix water.
Yeah.
Is that a fair way to put it?
It is a fair way to put it. Thank you. That makes me sound kind of smart. I appreciate that. And there are
Will,
some
you'll
pictures
get two T-shirts for that.
Two
Yeah,
T-shirts.
seriously.
All right.
I'm going to throw in a pen.
Forget it. You're going to be on 2 episodes then.
There are some pictures, and I'll share them with you so you can, if post them with your story. But there are pictures and there's this one in particular of a woman who had a picture taken of herself standing beneath this beautiful new sim tank. The sim tank is like, 500 liter, 1,000 liter black tanks that usually are on top of roofs or big storage tanks. And if you would measure her water security based on water availability, like there's a lot of water around, it's right by Lake Victoria, or if you would measure it by her access, her main source of water typically is water piped in from that sim tank. But if you measure her her use of water, the landlord has locked that sim tank, and very, very irregularly, and very often, but not predictably. So she was going through hell trying to get enough water, to bathe her kids and to cook dinner. So she had the porridge powder, but she didn't have the water to cook with. So my point is that it's only, infrastructure can lie and rainfall can tell one story, but it's talking to the people that you see where the wrinkles are.
I think what amazed me about that is it's firsthand on the ground visual data point of how this is affecting people personally. I think often when we talk about the numbers of people without access to water and sanitation, numbers in the millions, you can be quite removed from that because these numbers are just gargantuan. It's like, what does it actually mean for people without access? So clearly for you, that struck a chord to see even those images of did you say the drunken husbands drinking the water supplies and eating all the food?
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully
drinking up the food money.
Right. Okay. So what did you do about it? This obviously put you on a path to think something needs to happen here. How do we? This is a challenge. So what was your next stage?
Yeah, like I said, I'm partly trained in anthropology, partly trained in nutrition, and it was hard to go from this really qualitative training to biochemistry and statistics and epidemiology. At certain points, I felt like it was pounding rocks into cement. Right. But I learned all that stuff, and I got an A in organic chemistry. It was my proud moment. And from that, I learned that people want to know numbers, and that's how policymakers communicate. Isn't through novel ethnographic books, but it's through short, bite-sized pieces. Mm-hmm. So I knew that we needed to get people to condense these stories into short bite-sized pieces that that economists get, or that journalists get. They don't want to read my whole report. So I went to the literature and I was like, surely we know this exists for food. It's the food insecurity experiences scale is an indicator, so that's an indicator for the Sustainable Development Goals. Surely someone has already done this. And I went to the literature, I didn't really find it. And I still now keep looking behind my shoulder, someone's got to have done this already. But it's actually 8 years now that we've been working on quantifying water insecurity experiences and thinking about water differently. And I want to be clear, there are people who have made these scales for very particular sites. There's a great one for Bolivia. There's a great one for the Texas-Mexico border. But the power of anthropology is comparing across sites. And we wanted something that was more or less universal. So we first, baby steps, we developed a scale for Kenya based on some of the great work that other people had done to develop a scale for Ethiopia. But obviously water insecurity isn't unique to Western Kenya.
Right.
And so from there, with funding from a couple of fantastic organizations, I'm very grateful, Amana, NSF, NIH, we pulled together 30 of our closest friends from across disciplines, across time zones, across institutions. And we said, okay, like there's roughly these 30 questions that we think are candidates for being really like universally capturing experiences of water insecurity. Some of those were complete garbage and was a dumb idea to include them to begin with. Some of them were really good, but were very similar to another question that was there. So we dropped the garbage ones, we dropped the ones that were really similar, and through a bunch of blood, sweat, tears, statistics, theory, we honed it down to 12 items. And these 12 items capture experiences at the household level in a really robust and quick and easy way. I mean, it's 3 minutes. The questions are really kind of straightforwardly worded. And even my 5th grader can like analyze the data. So it ticks a lot of boxes. It's called the Household Water Insecurity Experiences Scale.
So this is the HWISE system that you've developed, right? It's open source, presumably, so it can be accessed and used globally.
Yes, you can click on, I'm sure there'll be a link. You can click on that link and use it right now. And if you do use it, I beg of you to keep those 12 items. You can add more, but a lot of thought went into those 12. However, I'll say the week that we published that, which I thought was like, the last paper I'll ever need to publish, this is great, my work on Earth is done. An economist wrote to me and said like, oh, but can you have a shorter version? Like, it's 3 minutes. Surely this is short enough, but it's not. And, this is before COVID, when people were doing much more face-to-face interviews. But with COVID, it's telephone surveying has really increased. So we developed what we're calling the BWISE, the Brief Water Insecurity Experiences Scale, and that's 1 minute. So yeah.
Sera, how, this does seem transformative to me. How is this being received by the private sector in understanding, how can they have a positive impact? Because, funding is scarce. Almost all the conversations that, I have are around, all right, great, we're spending money, but really, how do we quantify the impact of our investments and, ensuring not just from an ROI perspective, but, corporations want to do good. Well, what does good look like? So is there a disconnect in the dialogue between how you're thinking about this and what you're doing versus how they approach it from a water stewardship perspective?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And to answer it, I'm going to add one more chapter in the WISE Chronicles, Water Insecurity Experiences Chronicles, which is, okay, we did the HWISE, implemented in 30 places, and a number of organizations are taking up, like Oxfam has been an early adopter, and it's been super useful for impacting their programs. And I can talk about that. Then we did the BWISE, and then Gallup reached out to say like, hey, this is exactly, Gallup is the polling, they do a lot of polls, and they have the World Poll, which does nationally representative sampling in 140 countries. And then sort of a very lovely series of relationships between UNESCO, the scientific arm of the UN, Gallup, who does great nationally representative data collection, and then moi, we got together and we implemented an individually focused version of the scale, the IWISE. in half the world's population. So China, India, Brazil are amongst those. So with 31 countries, we can cover a lot of the world's population. And we did that just in 2020. And those data I have just come in, we're just looking at them. Fascinating. I'm telling you, they are fascinating. And it occurred to me, as you're saying, like, this isn't something only for academia. This isn't only something for Oxfam and UNICEF. This is something that, given water is as important and is being recognized as important as it is in the corporate world, this is something that could be a really valuable tool for corporations. So we've had a number of discussions with multinationals who see the importance of thinking about water differently. That's kind of like what I want to do, is we want to think about water differently. And they see that. And then they say they'll be glad when the data are available and and look forward to hearing from me when the data are for all available.
Yeah,
And
check in with me later. Right.
Yeah. And I will be happy to circle back to Joe in accounting or, Ned in the C-suite. But I need somebody to say, like, yes, if we need this data as a global public good, and we measure so many other things of value, we should be measuring water in the same way.
So how much money do you need?
Well, I have very expensive taste in champagne. I expect to be chauffeured by limousines. So, I mean, infinity.
That's why you're on the stream, Sera. So, we're fully aligned. But, this will be helpful in terms of thinking, okay, how do we overcome, that conversation, which is, I love what you're doing, but let me know when you're done. All right, so what will it take? What will it look like? How does it add value to, corporate water strategies and so on? So, you're not looking for $1 bazillion, right?
No, I'll give up the limousine and the champagne if we could get these data for a global public good. So in our consortium, what's that?
So that's why you're on the stream.
I mean it. It's kind of like a three-part thing. There's the data collection, there's the data analysis, and then there's the dissemination. And a year of that costs roughly $2 million. My grand evil plans are to collect those data across 5 years so that people kind of get the literacy associated with the IOI scale. So we sort of get used to saying, okay, well, it's roughly, 10% of the population. Like that's you set goals. Once you have data, you set goals. So I think a 5-year horizon would be really useful, both for literacy as well as understanding trends. I mean, we should have a baseline for what water insecurity looks like before the climate changes terribly.
Right.
It already is. So these data are urgent.
In terms of contributing and helping to fund the greater good and something that does move the Nile, the dial even, I'm not sure who Nile is, move the dial.
Good source of water.
Yeah, there you go. That seems to me not a no-brainer, but something where there is a kind of win-win for both parties involved, right? In terms of just getting more quantifiable data on something that we need as a global wicked problem. So what do you think's providing we're interested, but what's stopping, do you think, you don't have to name and shame the companies you're speaking to, because obviously you're banging on a few doors here to get the 2 million, but what do you think stopping companies committing?
Well, to me, $2 million is a lot of money. So maybe it's that. I mean, that can be sliced and diced in different ways. I mean, certain donor countries prioritize this 30 countries or this 20 and say okay, let's slice it. You can do this continent or you can do these priority countries. So maybe it's that. I think it's also early days. I mean, food insecurity experiences didn't used to be measured like this until most commonly in the 80s. And so this is new. I mean, when I tell people about this, they say but we have the JMP drinking water ladder. I love the J&P drinking water letter. That was the closest thing I had when I was starting my Kenyan study. But like with that example I gave you of the woman with the sim tank who was locked out of it, I mean, she would have been classified as water, as having the highest level on the drinking water letter, basic water services. And that would have been a misleading picture. So maybe it's too much. Maybe it's too new. And then maybe I'm not articulating well enough how to connect water to corporate strategies, because I know some nutrition, I know some anthropology. I don't have an MBA yet. So maybe I need to do that.
Well, that's why we're going to have a follow-up call to take what you do and align it, hopefully align it with the corporate water stewardship language, narrative, you know, what companies are focused on, how does this plug into it?
Yeah.
So it doesn't seem, you know, I guess alien in a way to, you know, how companies are typically thinking about water stewardship and what they spend money on. You know, and that's a generalization, but I think there's a little bit of a maybe a big disconnect.
Well, I've also learned this term recently, the halo effect, which is just like by associating yourself with a noble thing, like quantifying water for the world. You're making me thirsty, Will. by you know, being associated with that can help you look like an angel.
Right. And Sarah, you do need to hydrate. So
Thanks.
There we go.
Champagne.
It reminds me of the conversation we had with Dr. Chris Fisher from the Earth Archive in terms of bringing together kind of corporate funders to help effectively digitally map the Earth before it's too late. You know, in terms of that greater purpose, if we can all kind of it sounds very simplistic, I know it's a complicated thing, but all chip in and contribute towards something that's going to benefit humanity for the greater good, then that's a key driver. Maybe I'm not connecting these two things well, but there seems to be a kind of similarity between the two conversations, wouldn't you say?
I think there is. You know, what he has is a very simple way of describing his big idea. You know, how that translates to the corporate world, you know, it is going to take some work, but it's a simple narrative. Right.
It's the let's digitally map the Earth before it's too late. Oh, have we lost Sarah? Sarah, you're back.
Very good. I have no idea what happened.
No worries. It wasn't anything that Will or I said, or
it wasn't. Not yet.
It was
asking for T-shirts, free pens, USBs, or analogy to Dr. Chris Fisher. Hopefully, it wasn't that. So where were we before we got cut off? We're basically talking about the analogy to Chris Fisher, this greater purpose. But Will, you think this is a game changer, right?
I do. I really do, because well, the approach is very different than, you know, what I'd say we're mostly seeing in the corporate world. This is like the hard part of water. You know, building infrastructure, you know, I think is easy. Investing in offsetting your water footprint, not that it's easy necessarily, but it's, you know, it's a very simple, you know, way to frame your strategy. But actually going to people and asking them to tell you why they don't have access to safe drinking water, and then rolling that up as a way to define, well, what do we really spend money on? You know, it just seems to be incredibly, well, human-centric and granular. And
it provides clarity on why there is a lack of access to water. Like Sarah said, it could have been, instead of just saying that this person does not have, this community doesn't have access, well, why? It might be more than the fact that the water source is polluted or miles away.
Right. Sarah, is it fair to say that it's sort of the softer side of water insecurity, in that, you know, I think most water professionals, and I know I'll get into trouble for this, would look at it as an infrastructure issue. It goes to your comment earlier about, well, the plumbing's there, well, of course, this household has water because I saw the plumbing. Well, no, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
That makes sense?
It does. Someone else who actually a crabby hydrologist who shall remain unnamed also was crabby about this and say, like, why would you measure? And they called it subjective, and I would not say it's subjective. It's experiential. You know if you're going to drink thirsty or not, if you're going to sleep thirsty or not. You know if you have to change the food that you cook because of problems with water. You know if your clothes aren't washed because of problems with water. But it is experiential, and that's uncomfortable to a lot of people. And hydrologists have, 80, 50, 1,100,000 ways of measuring water, like externally, like over there. Why do you want to listen to people who, who misrecall? Humans are difficult, but when you take all the reports of people and you figure out how to ask the questions in the right way, you get a really accurate answer. And so this crabby hydrologist said, oh, this is the human face of water security. And I said, oh, we do understand each other. And now he is, I think, a fan.
And now considered not so crabby from the sound of
Yeah.
it. The friendship has blossomed. Right.
Or maybe still crabby, but at least informed.
Right.
A crabby, empathetic hydrologist.
So how far can this spread then, Sarah? Because, you started off looking at households in Kenya, but I think often when we paint the picture of people lacking access to water, it's exactly that, people in sub-Saharan or African communities. But actually, there's millions of households in the US that have access to water but still don't drink it because of, we won't say where, but there's still issues with lead piping that are still to be removed, and so they opt for bottled water instead. So is that something the tool will look at as well?
So many things to say to this. So we have validated this in low and middle income countries, and it works so well. We've also piloted it in high income countries like Bulgaria, Netherlands, UK, US, multiple sites in the US and Canada. And it resonates. And again, water can be really invisible, and water insecurity can be really invisible. But when people are saying like, yeah, we can't wash our clothes, or like, yeah, we people's water gets shut off a lot. This COVID has kind of revealed that a little bit, but these data on water insecurity experiences. So the Six Nations community in Ontario, Canada, the WISE scale, the HWISE scale, was implemented right before COVID. And a lot of people were water insecure. And those data were used to advocate to the municipal government, tribal government, like a local government, to say like, hey, we can't turn people's water off. Look at this. There's big problems with water. And in this time, you're supposed to stay isolated and wash your hands. If you have to go places to go get water, that's problematic on both fronts. So I see real potential. I mean, the cognitive interviews suggest, anecdotal evidence suggests, this is prime time for high income countries. And we can use this across levels. Like we can use this at a national level, like Gallup is doing. We can use it at community levels, like Oxfam has been doing to assess. They had this small intervention in Sierra Leone, a little bit of borehole, a little bit of governance training. And then they could compare these 900 households that did receive this intervention to the 900 households that are otherwise comparable that did not. And water insecurity decreased by 55%, 53%. I don't know, don't quote me on it, but like, you don't need a statistical test to see like, it was a huge impact. And how cool is that for an organization to not count boreholes, but to count how people's lives are affected?
It also strikes me, and I guess it's fairly obvious, that providing that data will drive investors to the right interventions and to what you're doing. Because again, it goes back to how do you quantify impact? Well, you can show that if you do this, it has a positive impact. So that, dollar or euro expended is, well placed.
Yeah. Well, and going back to your earlier question about why people do or do not want these data to be collected, is that it can reveal what is working and what is not working. And at Stockholm World Water Week last year, Zach Goldsmith, who's a British foreign minister, something fancy and British, said that the HWISE scale was something that can really, it's a smart indicator that holds people accountable. And accountability, as we know, can be scary. And so that example I gave you from Sera Young was super impactful. But it also can be that we measure things and see that water security is not changing after we spent $1 billion, which is important to know, for God's sake, but sometimes it's not happiness.
Accountability and transparency on what is actually working and what's not, right?
Yeah.
Transparency can be painful, but necessary.
Yeah.
Right.
And so given the many organizations who are investing, billions or at least millions for changing people's experiences with water, utilities who are responsible for making sure that their customers have water, wouldn't we want to know if their customers have water?
Right.
And the water that they need when they want it.
Good stuff. Sera, there is one partnership where you have ambitions, and we've talked about kind of knocking at the doors of multinationals, and that's with Unilever, right? You're having discussions and you have ambitions. So maybe you could, before we sort of come to the end of our allotted time, give us some kind of an overview of the conversations you've had there and maybe some of the ambitions. I think would be great.
Yeah, so I got connected with Maeve Hall, and I feel like let's give her a shout out because she in turn introduced me to you, Punums. So thank you, Maeve.
Out to Maeve.
I mean, we're in early discussion. This is not like anything for sure. But Maeve is enthusiastic, and so am I about just getting the data. I mean, I would like data that's nationally representative, but I also want to understand how whatever the intervention is impacts the people. So, I mean, Unilever has a suite of stuff that touches on water in lots of ways: washing your hands, washing your body, washing your clothes, food, and all of those are items in the WISE scales. So, I mean, I think Unilever is thinking about it both as a way of figuring out what products are needed or where people's experiences are coming up short, but also to evaluate some of their really cool, and I don't think that companies call it interventions, they call it something else, but I would call it an intervention. These interventions that they're doing, they're called, I wrote it down, so urban water, hygiene, and sanitation community centers. And they're building them in India. They built one, and it just seems, terrific. Like people can wash their clothes, people can get internet in a reasonable and clean environment. It seems like a winning proposition. And I would argue, surprise, surprise, that we need data around what that really does. So wouldn't it be tremendous if we can measure people's experiences with water before such a intervention occurs, during and after, and then like 2 years after, to see, is it just a flash in the pan improvement? Is it sustainable across time? And that just seems like a win-win.
Well, I think getting data on where there's actual impact is win-win for both parties, right? So good stuff. Well, Sera, thanks for talking to us about the HWISE scale and your journey into water. Will, it's $2 million. Do you think you can make it happen?
Oh, you got it through PayPal already. I was multitasking.
I'll check my phone.
We're good. Very sincerely, I believe this is a game changer, and $2 million in the scheme of things is much change. So why don't we try something different? Because the status quo is not working, right? It's broken. So yeah.
Sera, please send us any links, and we're happy to put it on the channel in the description. When we post the final video out, we'll make sure as many people we can touch and reach get to find out about this. So whatever we can do to help.
Well, thank you. It's been really fun to talk about this from the perspectives that you bring.
Great stuff. And a future episode may actually involve your husband, right, who's working on something very interesting. We're not going to say too much about it, but we're just going to say can we say the pregnancy test for water? Can we kind of like,
A little
say
tease
more.
there.
Yeah, we'll tee it up, say season 4, keep an eye out for Mr. Young to come and talk to us about that. But Sera, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for joining us. Telling us more. Best of luck with the continued journey in this, and yeah, appreciate your time.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Will.
Sera, thanks. Be well.
Bye.